I'm going to get into the application issue of disinfestants. I want to start off pointing out that pathogen survival is what we're dealing with. What we're looking for is the pathogen not to survive in the areas where we're going to bring plants into. A lot of these surfaces, whether it be a ground fabric or benches, a lot of the hard surfaces really are a hostile environment for these pathogens to survive, particularly if the surfaces are being exposed to sunlight. So a lot of organisms, when you look at spore survival, even on plant surfaces, some of them under direct sunlight survive only as long as 4 hours. And in the studies I was doing with the dose response curves, I was getting a reduction in germination just within a 24-hour period. So I'd inoculate the surfaces and then go to treat them the next day. And some surfaces, there was as low as a 10% germination 24 hours later. With Rhizoctonia, I've got studies going on right now, and I'm looking at it on ground, survival on ground fabric. There's a very dramatic decline within a couple of weeks when you're dealing with floors of propagation houses and under direct sunlight during the summertime. But while you are getting a decline, you're not you're still getting a low level of recovery even after 6 weeks. But with this natural reduction that occurs, we can use this in our favor because disinfestants, I'm showing you, aren't always effective. So if we do everything we can to improve efficacy, you can leave some of these surfaces bare for as many days as possible, whether it be 1 day or a week before you treat them, and that would likely improve efficacy of the disinfestants. Pathogen survival is going to be longer in organic tissues. So while I reported one study where they didn't wash the surfaces before treating them, in general, it is worthwhile to remove the organic matter because the pathogen's more likely to survive there. When you look at removing the organic matter, in some situations people are taking blowers or pressurized water and just removing the organic matter and blowing it off to the side. With many pathogens, I haven't seen a resulting problem from that practice, but again, you as a producer need to pay attention to what your pathogen problems are. Because for some pathogens, all you're doing is removing the inoculum to the area surrounding you. With some pathogens, you may need to collect that material into the middle of the production area and then collect it in some form, either a vacuum cleaner or just sweeping it up before disinfesting. So one step is removing organic debris. Something that's not done, which adds cost to the practice, is then washing that surface with soap. That's an added cost, and with a lot of these things, you're going to have to look at your production system and what you can justify. And that justification is going to be balanced on the seriousness of the problems you're dealing with. If you're not having a serious problem develop from your practice, then you can do things relative to the least costly practice. If you've got a serious pathogen problem, then you're going to need to consider other practices which may then add cost to it. I've done in studies where I've included washing a surface with detergent prior to using the disinfestant and found dose rates and contact times that did not give a high level of efficacy, gave a high level of efficacy or a 99% mortality when it was preceded by detergent. So again, Most of the time, these disinfestants are working. In situations where you find they aren't working, and that's not a failure of the product, it's just a complicated aspect of the biology that we're having to deal with, then you can start doing things to improve the potential of the efficacy of that product, such as removing debris, such as detergent. Each one of those steps, of course, adding cost. Now, when you're dealing with surfaces, one of the things that you're going to have to deal with is that with some difficult to control pathogens, it may require a lot of longer contact time. When you're spraying surfaces, you can't control contact time. If it's cool and cloudy, then it may take a half hour or an hour for that surface to dry. Other times, if there's air currents, hotter temperatures, that surface may dry in as short as 5 minutes. If you're dealing with a pathogen that's a little less sensitive, so you're requiring a higher contact time, in that case, an option is you spray an area that you can spray within 5 minutes. If it's drying in 5 minutes, go back and start at the beginning, spray it again, go back a third time and spray again, and that would increase your contact time. Now, I haven't seen any studies validating this, but I'm just trying to give some information that may be able to deal with the situations that occasionally occur when the disinfestants aren't achieving the level of mortality that we need. This same type of logic applies to sanitizing tools. If you're sanitizing shovels, something like that, that's a little more direct because you're not needing it as frequently. You can wash it and soak it for a prescribed period. General rules is 10 to 15 minutes. Though again, with some of these, 15 seconds is long enough. Other times, 60 minutes isn't long enough, but that's a general rule that's used. Relative to pruning tools, the longer you can soak it, whether it be 30 seconds, 1 minute, or 5 minutes, the more likely you are to achieve 99% mortality. If you're doing that, though, that of course increases cost, because now the person's having to do multiple actions every time they're pruning versus simply pruning. So this, again, it's a cost factor that you're going to have to take into account. If you're in an orchard where you've got severe fire blight problems, then the extra cost is going to be justified. If you're not having any problems resulting from doing a lesser degree of soaking in or not soaking, then you're going to have to balance that on what type of problem you're facing. Now again, some of these I'm finding troubles finding literature. I know with pruning shears, I have seen in the past where they sell shears with a bottle attached and a little injection port that every time you squeeze it, you get some alcohol goes out on that surface. Haven't seen any report showing efficacy of that. It seems like a really good idea, but again, it would probably vary on the pathogen problem, how well that would work. Again, I've seen studies where you can get a high level of mortality with just a 15-second exposure. So it's relative to your pathogen problem. I put this down here as a note. And one of the questions kind of asked about this too. All of these disinfestants are caustic. Most of us think about that relative to their reaction with metal. Some of these compounds also react with other types of surfaces, such as plastic. Relative to metals, all of these are caustic. I think they differ somewhat in the degree of their caustic nature. I haven't accumulated relative information for disinfestants. From my own experience, when I'm treating metal surfaces, I come in About 15 minutes later, and then I just rinse these surfaces with water. That reduces the degree of this problem, such as pruning shears. It's worthwhile to oil them at the end of the day. Again, that extends the life of that tool. So yes, these products are costly, but with care of the products you're dealing with, you can minimize that. Can't eliminate it, but you can minimize it. Relative to plastics, again, I haven't accumulated any information relative to that, but I know some of these do react with plastics, and they will likely shorten the life of the product, such as the ground fabric with bleach. I know xylitol reacts more with plastics than some of the other disinfestants or the hydrogen peroxide products, which, knowing that, you know, I've had concern about, well, does that reduce the longevity of the plastics? In truth, relative to irrigation pipes, I haven't seen any results that would indicate that there's a reduction in the longevity of plastics with the hydrogen peroxides. Though obviously they do react with some of these surfaces. So you're going to have to look at care, and if you feel that a certain product's reducing the longevity, you may try to consider other products, but I don't have recommendations for you that's going to help you. Relative to sanitizing pots, similar as far as surfaces and pots, there's options, and you've got to decide what you're willing to do, because each one of those options increase the cost. If you're reusing pots, there's definitely a risk of carryover of pathogens with that pot. If you're dealing with a crop that you literally have no disease problems in that crop, well, you know, reusing the pots probably isn't going to cause any problem. And I've known of nurseries to reuse pots for years without treating them and not have a problem. I've known people with problems. So you're going to have to look at your own circumstances. If you've got a crop that potentially is going to be subject to a pathogen that can be carried over on that pot, then those pots need to be cleaned and disinfested. People think of that logically with things like Phytophthora, Rhizoctonia, some of your Fusarium, Verticillium wilts. They're soil-borne organisms. So you can definitely increase buildup and spread of these organisms on used pots. But that applies for other organisms too. Things like Calotoptricum, which is a stem blight, survives very well in the soil, so it's potential to carry it over on pots, even though that's not a root pathogen. If you're cleaning and sanitizing your pots, there's a number of products. Some of them are liquid submersion. If you're dealing with liquid submersion, you're going to have a tank, and those pots are going to have to be completely submerged for that duration. So one of the concerns you're going to have to deal with is making sure there's no air pockets, because anytime you have air pockets, that solution's not contacting that specific area of surface. One of the things that can be used, of course, is steam. Also, some of these vapor products, such as the chlorine dioxide, a number of hydrogen peroxide products can be vaporized. They could also be used in a closed container, so they're a possible option. Though, again, I haven't seen literature on the actual use of those. With some of these products, there's a potential, and particularly with bleach, with some plastic products, there's some phytotoxicity issues with the production of chloramines. I've seen that in some of the older literature, though the nature of plastics has changed somewhat, and I haven't seen that information emphasized recently. So I think I've already covered this information here. I'm going to quickly touch on sanitizing plant surfaces. Disinfestants can and have been used for treating corms, tubers, seeds, a number of your more durable plant tissues. Some of the newer disinfestants, such as xylitol, are labeled for use on live plants. I did have a study where I looked at xylitol, and I was looking at it for daylily rust. It wasn't specifically for the control of daylily rust, and I'm not advocating that. It was just a patho system that I had available at the time, so it was just a convenient disease and crop to use for this study. But I looked at applying xylitol. What I found was the rates it took to get 99% mortality with a single application were too high and caused severe plant damage. But when I looked at lower levels of rates, such as are listed on the product label, I found that control could be achieved equal to using common fungicides labeled for this disease problem. The label listed it as 1 application per week. I found that control was not achieved with 1 application per week. It took 3 to 5 applications per week. There was no difference between those application numbers, though with different disease pressure that may differ. But control, again, equal to fungicides, was achieved by applying this directly on the plant, and there were no phytotoxicity problems. That would be an issue that would have to be taken up for different plant species. I think where this type of application would have the highest potential is in propagation facilities. I know of nurseries who actually do this. There are other products. Some of the chlorine dioxide products are and can be used in a similar fashion. So there's a number of products out there, and this is another potential use for disinfestants. So that concludes my talk.